Okay, it should work now.
Yep.
So today we're going to talk about how to stop a crisis. We'll give you some things that you need to be doing in advance, some things that you need to look at during a crisis, and how help could come in that process. When we think about it from a background standpoint, the worst disaster you'll ever see, or the worst crisis, is one that happens to you, your people, or your organization. We've got different levels of government involved in our call today, and clearly you're looked as a source of the solution if an event is occurring. And so you're going to have to take that leadership role. And one of the things that we found is how you respond to this crisis may well be your next crisis in that process. So there's a purpose of a crisis plan, and they're laid out here in those 4 blocks. That's the reason why you should think about a crisis management plan today before there's a crisis. It's easier to edit than it is to create, so having that plan in place in advance will make a difference. So we recommend following a predict, plan, perform methodology. Predict what the vulnerabilities and threats are that would face your organization. What would their impacts be? What would trigger that would activate that plan? What plan would you need to have in place to do? Has that plan been trained, or have you been tested on it? Because we don't want to try to figure it out once that crisis has started to occur. That's going to give you the best opportunity to move ahead. Doing an impact analysis, looking at the types of things that are listed there. What are the impacts on our people, on our finances, on our reputation, our security? Those are all the steps that take to begin to understand, if this happens, what do we need to address in our decision making? Then putting in place a crisis management program. It would involve your people, the processes, and technology to make sure those elements are put into place. Now, there are 3 things that can happen in a crisis. Something could happen to your facility. We could have a fire, we could have a flood, we could have a tornado. Something could happen to our technology. City of Atlanta recently had a cyber breach, and data was withheld and held for ransom within it. Something that could happen to our workforce. We've seen snowstorms keeping people to get to work. We could have communicable illness. There could be threats in those particular areas. Those 3 together can lead to a brand or reputational crisis associated with it. And there's a difference between crisis public relations and normal public relations in peacetime. So we want to think about that as we look at those elements in coming together. Now, in any particular event, we look at 5 stages: pre-action, onset, impact assessment, response and recovery, and post-recovery. Pre-action is what you're doing today. You're sitting in a webinar, you're hearing about what you could put in place, you could put your plan together, you could train. All of those events come to pass. Then the event occurs. Now our primary focus initially in the crisis or disaster is life safety. Are our people okay? Are they all right? Did they get to where they need to be? Have we protected our assets? Then we do an impact assessment. We do it at 2 levels. Once quickly at a high level to understand, is this affecting a lot of people or a few people? Have we had loss of life events associated with it? How do we respond to it? How do we recover? And then afterwards, we do a hot wash or an after action review to find out what are the lessons learned that we could do a better job. Now, you need a crisis management team, and in an organization that most of you are faced with, this is probably 3 to 5 to maybe 6 people. You can't go beyond those numbers. We were recently, a few years ago, with the hurricane moved up the coast, Sandy hit the New Jersey area and cut in. And one of the banks we worked with tried to get 150 people on a conference call to make a decision of when they were going to close a specific branch. 150 people can't do anything in that period of time. So you want to have a group that's small enough that they can function. You need a lead for the crisis management team and an alternate. And if there are 5 people on your team and only 3 are available, those 3 people are empowered to make a decision, because a crisis can't wait. And we're going to talk about those things. And generally, we're not doing anything related to something unless it's at a severe level. If it's routine, you're handling problems every day. We were doing some interviews with some of you before the start of it, and seeing that every day there's a crisis of some level within your organization. Now, what I have up now is what we would call a placemat. There are 2 sides to this document, and it's a quick thumbnail guide on how to handle a crisis and what would be involved in it. You'll see listed the management team that you would fill out. We talk about guarded, elevated, and severe, various categories. We talk about some of the impacts that could occur, because you want to understand those, because they're going to directly drive your decisions in a crisis. And then we introduce the concept here of outrage, fault, and fear. And that drives in your understanding, is there a crisis or not, and where's the nature of it? I'll explain that in a few minutes, a little later in our conversation today. The flip side of this shows you then how you start to look at what you need to monitor, what types of things that you need to do in each one of those areas, but it's a guide. We can't put you in a box with a checklist. You always do this, you always do the other. You're going to find in a crisis, you're going to focus on what are the decisions you need to make, what are the actions that you need to take, and what are the words you need to say. We'll clarify that a little bit more, but you can see a crisis management plan doesn't have to be a 100-page document with detailed checklists to slow you down. We're trying to empower you. You know your community, you know your organization. How do we leverage that knowledge here?
And just to, Jim,
sure.
You gave me this in a PowerPoint form, so I'll be able to send that to them, so
Absolutely.
they'll be able to use that.
And if anyone needs help, they can contact you and get in touch with me, and we would certainly be glad to do that. We've worked with several counties in the state of Georgia, as well as around the country. We're a national organization, and I didn't say it at the beginning. Firestorm has been around since 2005. We're headquartered out of the Atlanta area, but with offices around the country. We did the crisis management at Virginia Tech back in 2007, and we have handled a wide range of events for governments at the local, state, and federal level, as well as businesses, schools, camps, and churches. We're named by the majority of the insurance companies within the insurance policy to provide that crisis management services. So if you think about what you're looking for to have a recovery here, you'll see listed here, you've got to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, if you don't have strategies, if you haven't thought about it, you're going to get a suboptimal return. But let's focus now on what the biggest risk is that you'll face. Now, you know what you know. So you know if you're in a flood zone, you know if you're having a weather pattern, you have that knowledge and you can look at it. You know a lot of what you don't know. You don't know when this event's going to happen, but you know that it could happen. And finally, the biggest exposure you have is what you don't know that you don't know. That's going to be the thing with the rate of change that comes up and provides the biggest hassle for us, because you're looking at the problem right there at it. You need also to have a perspective so that you can see the total structure that it's going to fall in. It's the forest for the trees type of a concept here. And with the rate of change, and we think about things that are happening in our environment today, autonomous automobiles, we think about artificial intelligence. We see the area that in America today, we don't speak with each other, we speak at each other. And as you look at these elements coming together, they have a direct impact. Add into that social media, in that everyone that's around you can pull that phone out of their pocket and they can report that story, and it will drive the media news cycle where you're located. Now, I saw last year the movie The Darkest Hour, talking about Winston Churchill. And if you'll read through this quote, it really talks about it would be a disaster if at that point in time the person who was supposed to lead the response was unprepared or unqualified in what would have been their finest hour. Winston Churchill was a master orator. He used that finest hour comment over and over. But when you find that crisis in your county, in your city, in your department, in your organization, that is your time to focus on the solution. So if you think about it in a crisis, it's not business as usual, it's business as unusual. Because if it was normal, it wouldn't be a crisis. You wouldn't be at that point. So when you think about that, what do you want that first person to decide? What do you want them to do? What do you want them to say? Because how you respond in that first hour will determine, is this crisis contained or does it continue to escalate? Now, we talk with insurance companies and help them price these types of coverages. And insurance companies are focused on two things: frequency, how often does it happen? Severity, how bad is it? What you do in that first hour will determine, is this crisis going to stabilize or escalate? We'll talk more about that as we continue. Now, when you think about making a decision in a crisis, most everything you learn initially is wrong, and the consequences will last for a year. It comes as a surprise. I often quote the statement, the last time a surprise was good, I was 5 and it was my birthday. If you're at work and there's a surprise, there's something that's going on and it's not good. So speed is quality, data is not available, we don't have metrics, we can't drive from this standpoint. Now make a decision. Oh, and by the way, just to make it easier, you have bad choice 1 and bad choice 2. Which would you like to do? That's where we are today in thinking about crisis. Again, those first 24 hours, everything you learn is wrong. There was only one person involved. Turns out there was a bunch. We did everything right. Turns out, no, you didn't. You did everything wrong. Well, we had checked it. It turned out, no, you didn't check it. But the consequences, you don't have to worry about. They're just going to last for the following years. Now, I am a native of Georgia, in Atlanta. I can tell you that the state flower in Georgia is the Cherokee rose. Not all of us know all of the state flowers. I was talking with a group from Texas the other day in the bluebonnet. But if I ask you the state flower of Colorado, most of you would not immediately say, well, Jim, it's columbine. Because when you hear the name Columbine, you don't think of the state flower of Colorado. You think of the horrific shooting in the school. Crisis define. And as you look at these things, how you respond is going to be the determination. What is your organization known for? And that crisis will become the shorthand in using it. So as we think about that first hour, I want you to stop and slow it down just for a second. Before you're starting to say a bunch of things, we should start to think about, what do we know? What are the factors that are here? Who are the stakeholders? What are their issues going to be? What decisions do you need to make? What actions do you need to take? And what words do you need to say? And we use the word here, word, as opposed to what you need to communicate. It makes a difference. Are you going to call someone a citizen, or are you going to call them a victim? Those are two different connotations in how it comes together. We responded to a corporation a couple of years ago. They had a sales meeting. They brought their sales team in, and they went whitewater rafting. Now, what could ever go wrong? You put a bunch of folks that are a little bit out of shape, put them in rubber rafts, send them down a series of rapids. Oh, and we gave them some alcoholic to drink in advance that the company did. One of the rafts turned over. 4 men went into the water. 3 came out. 1 was trapped beneath the water for 2 weeks before he could be found. When we were talking with the company, their first comment were, we can't find the body. No, you can't find Frank. It's not the body, it's a person, and we need to talk about that. And we then started asking questions. Have the family asked to come? And they said, no. I said, they will, and sure enough, they did. And I said, who's taking care of the family? Well, the church is. He'd worked for the company for 26 years. That family bled that company. They were looking for them to be there and be a part. So the decisions you make, the actions you take, and the words you say will determine, is this going to stabilize or not? There were some questions on the bottom of that slide. Are you ready? How do you know? And are you sure? So that first hour, I want you to think immediate action. Just like if you were having a heart attack and an AED, by the way, you're supposed to only be 1 minute from an AED to have the optimum recovery probability. I'll also share with you that the battery in that AED lasts for should be replaced every 5 years. On a personal level, I would ask you to replace it every 3, because if I'm the gentleman laying on the ground, not having my heartbeat, I don't want to have my last words I hear are, damn, the battery's dead. So being prepared, being ready, in a stroke, getting that medication in an hour. So those first minutes will determine what's going to happen in this crisis. Think in a crisis, immediate action. There are 2 types of vulnerabilities that come from this. There are visibility vulnerabilities. One is what we draw the analogy to as the fog of war. You can see that things getting confused on a battlefield. Which direction is the enemy? What direction are they moving? What's their force size? What weapons do they have? If you're in a crisis, you're not going to be getting accurate information. If the power's out, you're not going to have the communications channels. And we've seen that repeatedly over. And that visibility vulnerability, because you can't see to what's going on, is going to affect your ability to perform. The other type of visibility vulnerability is when you're in a crisis, your words are disproportionately important. They'll be screened, and you don't have the luxury of a misstep. If you're the sheriff in your county and you make a statement, it's going to be doubly viewed in that crisis. If you're the head of a department, if you're the mayor of a town, those things are going to make a difference in everything you look at. So in a crisis, your visibility, vulnerability is one of the first things that we want to look at. We've given you here a series of things that you should look at in a crisis. These are actions that you can take, things for you to identify, things for you to establish, things for you to provide in looking in those areas. You need to understand and start to document. A tip here is take out a blank piece of paper, write down what you know. If someone's telling you something, write down the source of that so that you'll know where that information and where you need to go back with. So in managing the disruptive events, here they are spelled out in statements in a chronological map, gathering information, making the decisions, communicating those decisions, coordinating with others. If you look at that, there is an order and a priority in which you respond and make those events. Strategy questions are listed on this slide. The more of those that you can answer, the better off you're doing, and making sure if you've got a spokesperson that they're trained in advance. The media is not our friend here. If they're asking you questions, they're looking to try to create an argument and continue to escalate that crisis in every way. You might want to consider, and working with the ACCG and our organization today, is if you're bringing someone help, bring them in through legal counsel. You're trying to establish attorney-client privilege at this point because none of us know what we're going to find. Now, I told you I'd come back to outrage, fault, and fear, and that's what I wanted to talk about just for a few minutes. This tool you can learn quickly, and it's an easy one to communicate with others or senior leadership in your organization. In a crisis, to become a crisis, we have to have outrage, we have to have fault, and fear. Do you remember a few years ago there was a problem in Flint, Michigan with the water pump supply in the city? Imagine you're a parent, you go into your kitchen sink and you turn it on and you put your glass under it to give your child a drink of water, and the water's brown and it smells bad and it tastes bad. Is there outrage? Absolutely, because there are water standards in America. There's no reason for that to occur. So on a 1 to 5 scale, you're a 5. You're at the maximum level of upset. Was there fault? Yes, it turned out the water department knew that it was going on. The leadership in town knew it was happening, and it happened over a number of years. Again, full fault all the way to a 5. Now, was there fear? Yes, my child could get cancer. It could have cut someone's life short. There could be lingering health issues coming as a result of that. So it came out as a 5 on that. That's a maximum crisis. If you find that one of those areas are missing, then you don't have to address it in your decisions, actions, and words. For example, if the tornado hit, there's not going to be fault found unless you didn't sound the alarm. So looking at those elements and how they interplay, and the beauty is you can mathematically track that over time. If we did a message, did that lower the outrage? Did we transfer the fault away from us? Did we settle the fears? Those elements come together directly in that environment. And we measure that in terms of reach, acceleration, and context. By the way, did the story appear in the local penny saver? Or were you the front page of the Atlanta Journal, or are you on CNN? Accelerate, there were 10 people talking about, there's 100, there's 1,000, there's hundreds of thousands. We've seen how that acceleration becomes a factor. And finally, in context, how is this fitting in relationship with the other elements that are going on? As you measure them out, we then are in one of those quadrants, and it gives us different actions to do in each area where we are. In any crisis, there are 3 types of communications, the 3 C's. There's coordination, crisis, and compliance. The first communications you're ever going to get out is, what do you need people to do? Stay at home. We just had the shootings in Baltimore, in north of the city. There was a shooter who killed a policeman and was still at large. They wanted the citizens to stay at home. They wanted the schools to remain on lockout at that point in time. So coordination is always your first communications in a crisis. The crisis communications itself can be delayed. That'll wait till tomorrow. We're not going to be talking about our brand and our reputation and all of those elements right now. We're waiting to get all the facts. Remember, what you now think you know is going to turn out to be wrong. And finally, there's a compliance communication. If we've had a cyber breach, we've got to tell people that their identity has been stolen. If there's a risk, we have to communicate that. Is it an environmental risk of pollution? Is it a health risk? Is it an air quality risk? What are those elements that we're required to communicate? Always in a crisis, if you're explaining, you're losing. If there's been something that's happened and you're trying to say, well, look, the reason why that happened was this, or it wasn't our fault, or we did these other things, the public doesn't want to know. People don't need to know. If you find yourself where you're merely explaining in a crisis or trying to justify it, that's a conversation that's only going to exacerbate all the conditions that are there. Now, if you feel that you have to communicate, particularly in the first 24 hours, there's a rule of 5. Someone will come to you, someone on your city council or your leadership is going to say, we got to frame this issue. We have to get out in front and talk about it. And I want you to stop and slow it down just a little bit and say, why? They'll give you an answer. It's probably a pretty good answer. Then you ask, why? They'll give you another answer. You then ask, why again? If you do that 5 times and they have 5 good answers, you certainly need to be communicating on that subject. What I will tell you is over 90% of the time, by the time you get to the 3rd why, there's not a reason to communicate right now. And that gives you the luxury of getting the right answer so that when your communications comes out, it's appropriate. Now, there are a bunch of things to avoid, and I'm not going to read that long list, but remember, every crisis is a human crisis. If you find yourself in a situation, you have to communicate. There's a thing called home bases. I'd like you to take this away today. It's a way that you can help your people, and it's much better than saying no comment. When something bad's happened, the first thing is that will not define us. And then you talk about what does define your city, your county, your organization, and your department. Because it's not the tornado that hit. It was not the fraud that was created. It was not the abuse that occurred associated with it. So what does define you? That's not going to define who we are at this time. The second message is we're going to invent the future. Whatever went wrong, whatever created this crisis, we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure it doesn't happen here. The third message is we're going to embrace the families. So it's not about what defines us. It's not about what we're doing in the future. It's about the people that have been impacted here. That empathy and direction is the correct answer. Those 3 messages should be your first base communications in the first 24 hours. If you're trying to explain, no, we had 2 men in the patrol car, we threw down the strips to stop the tires, or we don't know why the body camera wasn't on, maybe it was not working. The more you supply answers that you don't know or you're unsure of or later turn out to be true, you lose credibility. Not to be true, you lose credibility. That's at the heart of what we're doing. So how do you transform a crisis into value? And when you look at it, there are significant organizations and local and state and federal governments that have done a wonderful job at communicating at critical times. You've got a set of instructions here, but I'll boil it down to a couple of things. Every crisis needs a general. It's not a matter of we're going to get a whole bunch of people together and we're going to vote. 5 of us think we need to do that and 4 of us something else. You collect all the information. Someone makes a judgment call at that point in time. It becomes critical for you to continue to monitor what's going on. So as new fact and information come in, you can adjust it and move forward with other areas. Another element is training, making sure your people are prepared to respond in each individual area. Now, this is a maturity model. It shows how when we're looking at it, here's the standard on how you should perform in a crisis. There are 5 dimensions that are absolutely critical in every crisis. The decision processes that were used, the roles and responsibilities, the information clarity, the speed of decision making, and the communications effectiveness. Now you'll see these are measured across 4 different areas, from a stage 1 where it's a liability and everything comes as a surprise, all the way over to a stage 4 where it's strategic and a part of your culture. You are elected, or you are served, or you volunteered for an assignment and you're working for that organization. Imagine that if you made good decisions and you had clear responsibilities, but you were too late in making those decisions and people died or were hurt as a result of it, it's not going to be a successful job. Similarly, if the instructions aren't clear, if the communications aren't effective to get the results you want, again, it was a failure. So we go through this exercise every time there's a crisis to measure how we're doing and monitoring it over time. Most organizations that haven't trained and worked in it are generally in that first column. Maybe you're higher in one of the individual categories, but you'll always be measured by your lowest score. If we do a football analogy, and in Georgia that's always a safe thing to talk about unless you pick one school over another, you could have the best defensive backfield in the entire world. You could have great linebackers, but if your line averaged 150 pounds, I'm not thinking you're going to do too well in the game. You could have the most outstanding All-American quarterback, but if everybody on your team had boards for hands and they couldn't catch it, then you're not going to win the game. You've got to have all 5 of these dimensions operating at least at a stage 2 and preferably a stage 3 in order to experience a successful outcome in a crisis. Every time you move from one stage to the next higher, you have a breakthrough. You see, from going from a stage 1 to a stage 2, that's a control breakthrough. From 2 to 3 is an alignment, and finally from 3 to 4 is a value breakthrough. You are in the position you're in because somebody felt you could bring value here. We've covered a lot of ground. By the way, this could be an all-day workshop as you go through scenarios and talk about what would you do here and what would you do there. Now, we work with the group here, and we have a program called Crisis Stop. And our commitment back through ACCG is that if you have a crisis, we'll get on the phone with you in that critical first hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and provide you support for that first hour, and will not render a bill. It's not about money, it's about people. It's about making a difference, and we can help you. If after that we need to be engaged, we can be. We have a variety of services. I'm not going to lead you through all of those today, but I did at least want to plant the seed. If you need help, we're there to help in each of these areas. So if you want to reach us, you can reach out to us a variety of ways, but I think the key element is a question I asked earlier. Are you ready? How do you know? And are you sure? So with that, I'll turn and see if I've got anybody still awake out there, and if we do, I'll be glad to answer those questions.
Let's see if we have any questions out there.
I think they're all asleep.
No, it's, let's see. I'm going to start, we'll volunteer. Allison Stevens, are you out there?
Nope, they're
I'm
asleep.
here. No, I'm here.
Do you have any questions, any thoughts?
I thought it was a really good training, and I got a lot out of the information today, but no questions.
Have you had any crises within your city or county?
Or that you're aware of, because you don't have to tell us something that's going on inside.
Usually our EMA director, who is also our finance director, kind of oversees this if anything does come up. And needless to say, we've had several crises with water, the weather, washing away bridges, which has hindered transportation in some areas. And of course, we've also had lost an employee to an accident on the job. And so we have had several things that have been, we would consider a crisis here, but so far we've been able to work through that. On the roads, it just takes a little time with that because of the cost to repair that. But as far as in the beginning, we do have a good public works department that's been able to go out and take care of things when it happens. But as far as being 100% ready, you have some really good points on the slideshow that maybe we need to, I hope we'll get a copy of this afterwards. Sure. We can pass this along to several other people here in our organization. But there's been some really
customizing it for your organization is important. You did something at the beginning of when you were making comments. I want to point out to everyone listening how smart you are. You started to say, we've had this, and we've had this, and we've had this, and you listed 4 or 5 different things. For everything that you've seen in the past or you think might happen, this is in the we know what we don't know, or in that area, go in and write those down and say, okay, if we've had the death of an employee on the job, What are we going to be concerned about? What actions are we going to do? What communications are we going to have? What training have we done so that someone can deliver that message to a family? We do a lot of work in the school marketplace. We've been assisting the children down at Mary Douglas in Parkland, Florida, after the shootings that were occurred there and the shootings over in Texas, as you're seeing it. Every school administrator, principal, superintendent, or head of school, even of an independent or private school, doesn't want to ever have to pick up that phone and call a family and say, your child's not coming home today. No family wants to get that call. They live in fear that it's going to come. No one will ever forget that call when it happens. The same is going to be true within your organization. So if we can think about these in advance, do the message maps. Here are the things that we're going to have to talk about. What's our first message, our second, and our third? Then you're going to provide help not only to the people that were impacted, but the people that have to make the decisions and have to deliver those messages. There's an Irish blessing or an Irish curse, depending upon your point of view. May you live in interesting times. We live in interesting times. If I were to ask you today, is the threat of violence in America increasing or decreasing? Everybody's got a different answer. But it's at least holding where it was. And that means that what we're doing today isn't working. So we have to find answers to these types of questions. Do we have other questions?
We have a couple other things, and I'll reach out. Thank you so much, Allison and crew. Edward Johnson says, very good class, lots of new insight. No questions, but thank you so much, Edward, for your comment. And again, you guys are all welcome to comment or question. Meg Blaha writes, sure wish we had this available before we had the neo-Nazi rally here in Noonan.
And you did a good job handling that event. And in today's world, nothing is a secret. Someone is going to be taping every aspect of it. It'll be put in, and it'll be put in with their previously established bias or orientation. Getting into an argument with someone who is diametrically opposed to what you're going to do creates a television story, creates a media event. The acronym that we talk about here is if it bleeds, it leads. They're looking for the controversy. So they'll take the mic and go, what do you think about that? Get that comment, come back and say, what do you think about it? And that tension is what needs to be done. Now, you would probably be a great help to me if I was in a crisis. But what happens when you're in a crisis, the first reaction is to strike out and say, that's not true. Here's the truth. And now you've got this tension of back and forth starting to build. It takes a great deal of restraint to let that go. It takes two people for an argument. If you find yourself drawn in this crisis where you're responding to every single element, it drives that protest further higher and higher, quicker. We're working with an organization right now, and someone posted a series of things that are just outright lies, complete fabrications and everything. And so the organization really wanted to get their side of the story out, which would tell the person who's posting this that I'm getting to them, I'm making them talk on my subject, my way. So restraint in this becomes a key element associated with it. And there's a meeting coming up in Aldridge next month, I think, and we're going to talk some about this more at that. That's in July, around those events.
Christy writes, great presentation, good tips, and very helpful guidelines. Thank you.
You're welcome, and I will encourage you, you have the PowerPoint here. That placemat we can work and customize to fit in organizations. And that we actually have gone so far as you laminate that. So if something's happening, you got it, because a lot of times with this, there's water, if it's a weather-related event. So now you've got something that can help support your senior leadership when they're making those types of decisions and structure. Anything else you'd like to comment?
How many crises do you manage on a weekly, monthly basis?
Well, we do about 6 a day, but we only do it 7 days a week. So we take off the rest of the week after that element. And they can range from small to large, but to the person that crisis is happening to, it's gigantic. It's the first time they've seen it. They're having to deal with it. The hardest thing we deal with is anything that happens to a child. it's so disproportionate in coming together. There is a commonality, and if you have schools in your area or you're involved in them anyway, I would encourage you to go to hashtag share the formula or sharetheformula.com. It's a free website. And there's a formula to stop school violence. It's focusing on behavior. And there are 9 elements in that formula. This is a chance that you can take that. It's a copyrighted formula that Firestorm developed after 10 years of research. And we're giving it away to all the schools in America because we don't want to get another call to go to yet another school where there's been yet another shooting. There are warning signs in every one of these events. There are behaviors of concern. If they were interacted with or intervened with when they first arose, that gun would never come to school. So it's not about guns, it's about behavior. And if we can empower our schools to start to focus at that point, it makes a difference. And now there are new tools in artificial intelligence and others that you can find that behavior. There are 2 statistics, and I know we're not focused just on violence today, but to talk about it. If someone has ill intent, 80% of the time somebody else knows. And 67% of the time, 2 or more people know. And when 2 people know, what do? They talk. Where do they talk today? That's on social media. So you'll find that information out after the fact. We did an analysis of the active shooters and to look at what they had posted in the weeks prior to building up to the shooting event. And we found an extremely high correlation here at the 95% level. So if you're doing those types of activities, that knowledge is known, it can be intervened, and you can help this person that's in trouble, that's had all these elements that have occurred. I just did a webinar about an hour and a half ago for 107 fire districts across California. Being a fireman is a very tough job, and when you look at the fire service associated with it. But you may not know that the suicide rate of firemen is 10 times the average suicide rate in America today. And suicide is a significant problem, but there are behaviors of concern that are indicators before that person feels they have no choice.
One of the points I was trying to make when asking about the 6 a day is the level of expertise. You guys have a great deal of expertise, and it might seem simple to the person that has that crisis about communication, but there are things that you know the things that most people don't know. Is that correct?
You're very kind, and say that. Where there's a slide in there that says a crisis isn't business as usual, it's business as unusual. Maybe you're only handling 1 in a year or 1 in a quarter. If we're handling 6 a day, we see the same thing unfold over and over. Another football analogy, Peyton Manning for years was a great quarterback in a variety of areas. And if you remember, he would go up to the line and he'd look at where the defense was, and he would immediately decide the play that I called in a huddle isn't going to work. I called a run, and they're in a run blitz, I need to do something different, or they stacked on the right, we were going to go there. And he would go up and yell, Omaha, Omaha, Omaha. And that was telling everybody on his team, we're going to do something different. You better listen really close here. Because he was used to that crisis element. When we come in, we're going to start to ask you questions that we've seen. Things that you think are true are going to turn out later not to be. We need to ask those questions. We can also start to figure out and opine on what resources do you need. Do you need additional security? Do you need counselors associated with this? Have you gotten your in-house legal counsel, your outside counsel involved? Have you notified the insurance pool and your coverage elements associated with it? And then help you look at and opine on what are the short-term impacts and what are the long-term impacts. Sometimes an action you think will help today is going to create a significant problem down the road. If we can keep you from making that mistake, it's going to make a difference.
The first caller, the person we talked to, had several things. We talked about crisis. They had a lot of different things. And again, probably those things might be able to manage in-house, but is there a rule of thumb for things that potentially you might be a little bit more expertise or have the ability, those crises have a more likelihood of expanding or blowing up? So sexism, racism, children, death, any of those particular?
Let's add them all together, and then it's. We were kidding before the conference started today, or the webinar started today, and I shared that crisis is a growth business. If you look at #MeToo and the allegations, if you look at the removal of statute of limitations, where now someone says 20 years ago this happened, how do you prove something did or did not happen 20 years ago? I did a series of workshops across Tennessee for the schools there on #MeToo. Yes, there's sexual molestation in our school. We see these actions coming forward, and those are hot triggered topics. We have diversity across America. It's an absolute strength. It also is a point of tension. And it's very easy to say that that was the cause, or that is the behind the scenes issue. The other thing that happens here to you and your organization, are you empowered to tell the person at the top of the organization, stop, you can't say, you can't do that? And a lot of times an outside expert can come in and say, no, we're not going to hold a press conference. I got a phone call 4 years ago from the president of a state university. It was not here in Georgia, so everybody relax. I'm not going to give any outside details up on that. But his board made him call Firestorm, and I answered the call. And I talked with him, and he said, we have cannibalism on our campus, and I want to hold a press conference today on that. And I went, no, sir, we do not want to hold a press conference about cannibalism. Could you imagine? President of the university standing here, school logo here, and he's saying we have cannibalism on our campus. And so we stepped him through that process and explained to him that's not the way to handle it. If we were in a live audience, I'd ask how many of you followed that in the news, and generally people go, well, I didn't know about it. And I'd say, thank you. If you think about the impact of that statement, cannibalism in a U.S. college, by the way, in Baltimore, who had cannibalism on it, and it's not national news. Had he held that press conference, he would have been the lead news story that night on national television, and forever that would be known as Cannibal U. A humorous sidelight on that is while we were doing the orientation, and we did that free hour initially with him, we were wrapping up, and I said, you know, I think you've got it from here. And he goes, well, we need you to come. And they really did, to do an investigation and help with other things. And before I could answer, the purchasing officer was on the phone. And the purchasing officer said, stop. We have to put this out for an RFP, a request for proposal. It'll have to be out for 60 days. And then, you know, if you're the top bidder, you can come, you're the best bidder, you can come back. And I said, don't send me the RFP. We will not respond. He said, well, you've already helped us. You already know what we've got. Why wouldn't you do that? Because 60 days is too late. If we think about all of these events, too late is too often too common. And so in looking at this, knowing what to do, what to say, what not to do, what not to say, will make a difference. Does this crisis stabilize or does it escalate? Is this what your organization, your county, your town is going to become known for? Are you going to be the Columbine in this crisis category? We worked with a very large client. We worked with small clients too. But this was a Fortune 15 company. Money was no object. By the way, if anyone knows any big companies where money's no object, give them a call. I'll be right there. We'll do a finder's fee and cut a deal. But they called up and said, they're in the technology area, not in the finance area. They said, we want to know what our Wells Fargo strategy crisis is. What would happen in our industry that would be equivalent to what happened to Wells Fargo? If you remember, they had people opening accounts without telling them about it. In that environment, we figured out what theirs was and trained them. But if your name becomes associated with a type of crisis, you suddenly have now been defined by it, and that's the change. One interesting sidelight that I found humorous was when I was talking with him and trying to determine what they thought a major crisis was, they said, Jim, if it's less than $5 billion, we don't care. Now, once in my life, I'd like to be able to say, hey, it was only $1 billion. I don't really care. But you care. You care about your organization. You care about your people. You care about the citizens in your area. You wouldn't be doing the job you're doing so well every day if you didn't. Making these decisions, looking at data-driven crisis management, looking at insights, monitoring social media, using predictive intelligence will make a difference in the outcome. We're here to help. If you need us, reach out. Back to you.
Very good. So thank you so very, very much for being here.
My pleasure.
The one thing I want to reiterate to all the people that are participating today is that, again, their first hour of service is free of charge, so it's not going to hurt. If you have a question regarding a crisis, pick up the phone and give them a call. It's not gonna hurt anybody, and they'll probably provide you some good advice on what they'd be doing. The other thing it is, and I was going to kind of throw a softball to you, but you already hit that one all the ballpark, was timing is everything. So you have a crisis, don't wait 2 weeks to give them a call.
First hour.
First hour, give them a call.
We responded to a crisis the other day, and they said, well, this happened 3 weeks ago. Think about all the decisions, all the actions, all the words that were made in that 3-week time frame. You're trying to, there's a term here called walk the cat back. It's hard enough to get a cat to walk in the direction you want it to go. Imagine trying to walk that cat back from 3 weeks of bad decisions. That's an environment. Thank you for what you all do in your job every day. We need you. We appreciate you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you guys very much. Have a great rest of the day.
Goodbye.